Break a leg? Nou ja, niet letterlijk.
We gaan het proberen. Hè. All right, good evening. My name is Alwin Wijmeers. I've been here before on this spot. Maybe some people remember. So I'm a freelance web developer and also instructor from time to time. I've done a lot of back-end work as well, but nowadays I'm more focused on the front end. I have a small company called Flames Productions. We do mobile and web applications using different technologies. So I'm here to talk a bit about AngularJS, which is a JavaScript framework. And maybe you're not the right crowd, but I think it's a very interesting framework. It's good to know something about that. So very short, how did I get to Angular? Well, I was approached a couple of years ago by a client, and he wanted me to make a touchscreen application. So I was like, okay, I have this perfect technology, which is called Flash. Now, apparently, Flash is that for some people. So they told me, well, it has to be HTML5 because maybe we want to make a website out of this as well. And some people still think it's the magic bullet, but nevertheless, I just threw myself into JavaScript development and touchscreen and application development using web technologies. So I started with Backbone.js, which was quite nice because it allowed me to take a very object-oriented approach. So I could use the same techniques that I was using in Flash and in Java and in other technologies that are really object-oriented languages. But then I got a bit bored. So this is what I like to do from time to time. Sometimes I just want to try something new. That's very important for me to stay focused. So because JavaScript is not an object-oriented language, you have to take a different approach. You need a different technique. So I started comparing all the different frameworks. There's Knockout, there is Angular, there are a whole lot of frameworks that you can use. But it's from Google, so I love Google, so I said, okay, I will stick with Angular. And it was quite all right, because it's strange at first, but hopefully after this half an hour or so, you will have more insight. All right. If you have a question, don't hesitate to just raise your hand. I will ask. I will try to respond as much as I can. So what exactly is Angular? Well, Angular is all about model-driven views. So if you use JavaScript, you tend to use jQuery a lot to access an element, take the data, do something with the data, and then display it somewhere else. With Angular, you're not going to do that. Angular is going to update the document object model for you. So that's what I mean with this image. Let's say that the car is the document object model, so all the elements on the page. Well, you don't need to steer. Angular will do it. You just tell it what it should do, and then it will do all of those things for you. And basically, how you're going to do is you're going to have a regular HTML page, and you're going to add small tags. Usually, they're prefixed with this, ng, and then a dash. And then Angular will find all those keywords, and it will work his magic. So, just as a quick example, it's the only live coding, so I hope this will work. So, let's say we have a simple page here, and I have an input field, and I want to get the value from that input field, and I want to show it on a different location on the page. Now, the first thing that I need to do is I need to enable Angular. So I'm going to start by adding this to my tag, which is ng-app. And this is the bootstrap for your Angular application. You don't have to add it on the HTML. You can add it anywhere on the page. And this allows you to have multiple applications running on the same page at the same time, which is very interesting. Well, I haven't used it until this point, but the idea is very interesting. there's also, you might wonder, well, isn't this going to give me conflicts with standards and stuff? You can also do data dash and then ng-app, because ng-app is basically just a data attribute which is part of the HTML5 specification. Now, what I can do in this input field, I can just bind this to a model. Very easy to just add ng model equals name. That's it. From now on, every time I update this input field, somewhere in the memory there's going to be a variable called name and it will be updated.
Are there keywords you have to avoid? Like in the name?
No.
Sounds
No.
like a dangerous name.
No. You're free to do. It's magic. There are no rules. So if I want to take that variable and I want to display it somewhere else, what I can do is I can use these curly braces, which some people may recognize from templating engines like Handlebars or Moustache, or even in Flex as well with single. It's been so long, I don't remember. So what I can do is I can just use the same variable and everything will work. So let's see what this will do in the browser. Just gonna refresh this. And it works out of the box. I don't need to do anything. So that's pretty nice. And also, it works, it's two-way binding. So if something else is updating that value, it will reflect in the input field. So just duplicated this. I'm going to go back to my view here. So as you can see, it's two-way binding out of the box. So it's very nice. Now, that's all pretty interesting, but we're not really making an application that we can reuse. We just have a single page. So now we're going to extend this. First of all, when you create an application, this is the syntax that you use. You have a keyword called Angular. You define a module. An Angular app is actually a module. You give it a unique name. And then you can pass in the dependencies, because Angular is very speed optimized. So in the beginning, they just threw everything in one big file. But now, when they see that Angular is starting to become very big, they split it up in different modules. So you have the animation. The animation part, for example, is now a separate package that you need to import. So that's why we have those dependencies in there. So if I take a look at that, for example, can everyone see this? Yeah. So now I make a new application, so Angular module, it's called My App, and the only dependencies that I need is ng-route, which is responsible for the routing to go from one view to another view, and then ng-animate to add animations. Okay. So that's it. So you make an application, you store it in a local variable, in this case, app. Now, in this page, all of my logic is inside the same file as my view. I don't want that. I want to split it up in a view, which is just the layout, and then another part, which will be the controller. This will take care of all of the updates. This will update the view through a mechanism called the scope. So that's why we need controllers. And controllers will always be mapped to views on, in a couple of ways. If I take this example here, as you can see on this div, I have a keyword called ng-controller. This basically means that this tag and all of its contents will be the view for that particular controller. So when I write a controller, I can access all of these elements, and all these elements can listen to model changes. It has a unique name, which is in this case register controller. Now if I go to my my JavaScript file, what I can do is, on my application, I have a couple of functions where I can define all the components from my application. In this case, I want to define a controller. I give it a unique name. Again, you're free to choose the naming here. And then you have this strange syntax. And I will just make it more clear for now. Basically what you need is you need a name, and then you have a function, and that function will be the controller. Now you notice that I get one variable here, which is the $scope. And this is where the whole dependency injection from Angular comes into play. Basically, all the elements that you are going to need in one particular space, you need to inject them. In this case, scope is the mechanism that will trigger changes in the view. So whenever you add something to the scope, it will be available in the view, and the view will automatically update. So in this case, what if I want to show a list of attendees for this event? As you can see, this is a small application. On the left side, I want to show all the people that have registered. And on the right side, I will have a mechanism to add new people. Now these two are already combined because here we have an ng controller. Okay, so it's already bound to our code. So what I can do here is I can do scope dot attendees. I'm just going to use a snippet. So on my scope, I define a variable called attendees. This is an array, and I put two objects in that array. When I go back into the view, there will be a variable available called attendees. So when I go back here, you see I have an unordered list, and I have a list item for each of the attendees. What I'm going to do is I want to create a looping structure. I don't want to loop over it like I would do in jQuery. I don't want to use a templating engine because it's already built in. I can use something called ngRepeat. And I can do attendee. Now this attendees variable is the variable that I just created in my controller, right? And then here I have a span element, and I want to show the name. So just like that. Now when I refresh the page, it doesn't. Yeah, it does work. Okay, so that's cool. So now Angular has taken this attendees array collection from the controller, and he's generating the list. Oh. Come on, you can do it. Okay, it's broken. Right, never mind. Now, another thing, I also have a form, as you can see here. And when I submit the form, I want to take a new attendee and I want to add it. It's very easy as well. As you can see, we have a construction here which is called ng-submit. You also have ng-click. And in this case, it's not responding to a property. It's a function that it's going to call. In this case, add attendee. Now, I also have an input field here which has an ng model called attendee name. So now in my function, I will create a new So my scope, I can also define functions, which is what I'm doing here. So I add a function, add attendee. It's going to take the attendee name from the scope. It's going to create a new object, and it's going to push it in this scope here. And then it's going to reset. So let's see what this will do. Sorry? Ah, yes, thank you. Very good. Okay. Maybe that's a bad idea. Let's switch to the prepared demos. So now I'll press add, and it will push this to the collection. Yeah? And as you can see, it's automatically updated. Now, another cool thing is that, for example, when I click a checkbox, it should also update the view for that individual line. And the way that is done is very easy. We have the checkbox here, and it also has an ng model, which is linked to that variable. In this case, it's confirmed. And then we have another construction in here, which is called ng class. And ng class allows you to specify classes based on conditions. So all of this is dual binding. So the list is generated based on the data from the controller. And then when you click one checkbox, it will update the model of that individual line, and it will update the view again. So all of this is done automatically. So that's controllers. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, this is pretty boring application because it's just one page. Okay, so that's not really interesting. We need more pages. And this is where routing comes in. Routing allows you to listen to URL changes, and then Angular will load a specific view, it will load a specific controller, and it will do all the mapping. So basically how the way navigation works in Angular is as follows. You have a change in the URL. In this case, by default, it's using a hashbang construction, but you can change it via the new HTML5 location spec. Then it's going to look up and see, okay, this page should load that view and that controller. It's going to map them together. There might be some optional dependencies that you need to wait for, which is out of the scope of this presentation. And then it's going to load that view in a particular location in your app. Basically, when you have a template, for example, this is a little bit more complex template. Basically, this is my template. The page is not going to refresh. And when I click on the navigation on the top, it should load the view only here. It should not reload the navigation bar. It should not reload any other things. It should just update this part of the page. And this is done by defining a tag called ngView. So as you can see here, we have an empty div with a property ngView. And then Angular knows that it should load the new views in this location. Now, how do you set this up? How do you do all of the routing? Well, this is a bit more complex. This is done through the configuration of your application. Basically, there is a component that you need to inject, which is called the route provider. And on the route provider, you say, well, when the location changes to /about, you should load this template or this controller. Now, as you can see, not every view needs a controller. If there's no model behind it, it doesn't need a controller. So in this case, I'm just using template URL, and it's going to use the files from my views directory. Then when it's registered, it will load this controller and then the other view. And then you have this one last thing is otherwise, and otherwise basically means this is your 404 page. Okay, so if I add something that doesn't exist, just load about page. So this means when I take a look at the URL on top, by default it will load about, because when you don't add one, that route is not specified, so it's going to redirect to the about page. When I click register, it's going to update the URL. It's going to recognize that update. It's going to fetch all the components, combine them, and show it on the screen. So the whole thing that I showed you earlier, this whole application, or this mini application, will fit into the other application because it's all controllers and views, and it just works. And this is all very interesting, but what if I want to share this data from one controller to another? Because in this example, I have a register form, but maybe I want to have another page where I just want to display everyone that has registered for this event. Then I have a small problem. Because as you can see here in the controllers, the register data is stored inside of the controller. It's not shared throughout the application. It's stuck there, and I have no way of retrieving this information from another controller. Because the moment you switch the page, everything that was there will be destroyed by Angular. There is no persistent data in this case. So we need a new component. A component that we can define, where we can put all of our data into, and that we can inject in the parts of our application where we actually need it. And this is done through either a service or a factory. So if you come from an object-oriented background, you think, okay, we have models. But models, the concept of a model doesn't really exist in Angular. You have services or factories. Basically, they are the same thing. The only difference between the two is the way you write them. So it's more of a personal preference. And what's interesting with these models is that Angular will define them, will construct them, it will only keep one instance in memory. So it's sort of a singleton without you having to do all of the singleton code. And the moment you create it, you can inject it in the parts where you actually need it. So defining a service or a factory is very easy. Again, we have the Angular module, we define that, we store it in a variable, and now we have a function called service or factory. And again, the same construction here. You give it a name, and then you pass in a function, and then the function will actually be the entire service. In this case, I set the registration, for example, on the this keyword, because the this keyword is actually the entire service. Yeah? So, and then here I can also define these functions. For the factory, it's more or less the same, but instead of working with the this keyword, because all the code you define here inside of the service is actually inside the service, in a factory you create a blueprint, and then you return a blueprint, and then Angular will make an instance. So this is a bit confusing, because when we think about a factory, we usually think about something that can instantiate multiple copies of one blueprint. But that's not the case. So in Angular, you don't need to worry about that. So we define a model. In this case, it's just a regular object, and you define the variables and the functions on that model. And then you return the model. And the cool thing is that now, when I take a look at this application, and so I have a service called registration service. It has a function. And I define the same collection that I used before in the controller, but now I have it in this separate element. What you can do now is, in this case, instead of defining it right here, I can inject it. And you inject it like this. So you have the same markup, register controller. We already injected the scope in order to talk to our view. And then we also inject our registration service. Now, you might be wondering right now, well, how does Angular know what to inject where? Because registration service, it's not a data type, it's not something that is available. And the way it does that is by, well, the name. It's very important that you use the exact same name here than the name where you define it. And that's basically the rule. So this sounds very silly, but that's the way Angular knows how to inject which elements. Now, this can be a problem, because what if you're going to obfuscate your code? The problem with this markup is that if I obfuscate this code, it's going to change the variable names. It's going to change and it's going to destroy my application, because dependencies might, scope, for example, might become $S or $F or just a random bunch of characters. So then you actually break the application, because Angular no longer knows which element to inject. So that's why we have this alternative markup. Because, as you might know, obfuscating code will not change any literals. It will not change strings, or it will not change numbers. So instead of having a function here, we pass in an array. And the only difference here is that first you're going to list all of your dependencies as strings, and then afterwards you will have the function either for your controller or for your model. And then you can change the names of these variables, because at that moment it's no longer important what the name of this variable is, because it already knows which element it should inject in that specific variable. So that's, for code obfuscation, it's better to write it with the array syntax. So that's one problem tackled. There's one other thing with the route provider, is that how are we going to do nested views? For example, if we have on the left side, we have a list with its own controllers and its own models. And then on the right-hand side, for example, a phone book. On the left side, you will have all the names of the people. When you click somebody, it will load on the right side all of the details. At that moment, you're dealing with two views at the same time on one page. Unfortunately, you can't do that with Angular out of the box. You're stuck with one view on one page, so you can't do all these parts. There is, however, a solution to this, which is called UI Router. And UI Router allows you to subdivide your views into other views. And it's very complex. But the good thing is that they are actually working on the new version of Angular, and there they will have this mechanism. So in the future, maybe it will change and it will become part of the core Angular. But for now, you have to use UI Router. It's also made by the same people that are working on Angular, so you have very good support. It's still a little bit beta, but I haven't run into any problems so far, so I can advise you to just look into it and use it. Okay. So let me go back to this factory that I had before, because in this example, we have one more page that we add on our application, which is the attendee list. And so we had the two buttons. We had about, you could register somebody, and then we have the registration list, which will show the same data that we have here, only in a slightly different manner. Now remember that I injected this collection in my controller, my register controller, and I can do the same thing in another controller. If I go to RegList controller, which is the controller for my third page, I can do the same thing. So I make a controller called register list controller. I inject the scope, and I also inject registration service. Then I take this property from the model and I add it to my scope, and then because I add it to the scope, it will update the view. And then actually you have a pretty nice application. So I can add somebody on this page, and I can move to another page, and it will still use the same data because it's injecting this in one controller. I update it, and then it will be injected in another controller. Also, when I update here the checkboxes, I don't need to do anything, and it will update the other view as well. Notice that this is not done simultaneously. This is all one page you see at the same time. The rest is destroyed. Okay. Any questions so far? Everything still crystal clear? All right. So that's static data. What about dynamic data? How can we get information from a server, like a JSON file, or just from any source that outputs JSON format? We have to inject a service called HTTP. It's very easy. So this is another example, the same controller that we used before, the register controller. And I'm going to inject this new service called HTTP. I'm just going to create first an empty collection, and then I'm going to call this service, this called Fusion service. Basically, this will just output some data from a database. And I just heard that I don't need to do this anymore because of ColdFusion 11, so that's awesome. Very, very productive day. Because now we can't just output a query into valid JSON. We have to do this array structure. Well, you can do it, but it's not usable out of the box for Angular. You have to write some other things, but this will be solved. So what I'm going to do is I have two functions on HTTP, which is called get and post. That's it. Very easy. Get is just you need to pass this string. And if I visit this on the page, it will just output JSON. Now, the HTTP service works via a concept called promises. And I don't know if you recall, there has been a talk about this by Damien. He talked about deferred objects and promises in jQuery. It's almost the same thing. Basically, HTTP GET will return you a promise. And a promise is, well, I don't have the result yet, but if it will be successful, you can do this. If it fails, you can do that. So that's why we can append here two functions, which is called a success function. And I can also append an error function if I want. Well, it's already there. There are two ways of doing this. You can either use success and error, or you can use this function which is called then. And then the only difference is with then you just define two functions, two callback functions, a success callback function and an error callback function. The result is the same. So this result, it will return, and I assign this to my attendees, which is the same thing. So now this application is no longer using static data, but it's using data from the database. So this is from the database. And in a similar fashion, I can also post stuff. So let's take a look at our add attendee function that we had from the beginning. What I can do here is http.post. Again, pass the URL, and then you pass in an object. That's the only requirement, an object, and then this will be available in ColdFusion. However, if you want to get data from an Angular call in ColdFusion, it's not just inside of the variables or inside of the form scope. You actually have to add some custom code to read it, because Angular is using a different approach to posting data to a server. It's more like a stream of data rather than just one post. So I found this code by Ben Nadel. He's done a terrific job of providing it for us. I'm not going to go over the script, but just know that if you want to process data coming from an Angular application, you need to add this extra layer of data. So it's getting the raw HTTP request data and then getting it from there. So it's the same thing with PHP, by the way, or any other server. You need to add an extra layer that will read the HTTP headers and then take the data out of there. So again, this will output JSON as well. So if I just call the URL, it will just return me a success false with an optional error message. And then if the call is actually successful, it will return true and the new ID, the inserted ID. So when I take a look here in the code, so I have my then. I have a function with the result. And the result, I can check if the data was successful. If the data is successful, I can push that in my collection and it will update the model. So now on my register page, give me a name, somebody? Name? George. Well, add will be added in the database, so if I refresh, it will get the right data. And it seems that George did not confirm his attendance yet, so we're going to fix that. And it's also not updated there, so that's okay. That's something that will have to be ironed out. So that's getting data, sending data. It's very easy using the HTTP. And again, you just inject whatever you need, whatever service you need. The same thing goes for if you want to change location, for example, you need to insert the location service. You will find an extensive list of available modules on the AngularJS website. And then also you can create your own modules. You can create your own applications that you can inject in your controllers. Now, what I've done here is actually a bad practice. Usually you don't make HTTP calls from your controllers, you make HTTP calls from your services or your factories. Okay? And then what you need to do is you need to create your own promises or your own deferred calls. I will not get into this too much, but there is a service called Queue, and Queue allows you to make promises and stuff like that. I will add the code as well on the website, so you can check all the code and all the things. Okay. So that's basically it, actually. I know it went very fast, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot.
How often do you use this model?
Sorry?
How often do you use this model?
The Angular? All the time.
All the time?
Even for very simple things, yeah. Because once you have you get it, you don't want to go back to doing everything with jQuery where you have to fetch this and that. And I'm a really big fan of injecting all the data that I need, and then also reusing it. Yeah. So now also for my mobile applications, I also switched to Angular, and then combining it with a presentation framework like Ionic, which has all these nice views out of the box. So yeah, I use it quite often now. Yeah.
Now this is just for having the right layout or having the right look without compromising the view or the browser or the application.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
No, I mean, actually there are objects, there are elements in one page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
So you need to display them in the right place without messing the CSS in the right place and everything.
Yeah.
So that's the main reason you use Angular for this.
Yeah, I use it so I don't have to bother with smaller things that I need to do over and over and over again, like getting things from an input field and then processing it, because it works out of the box. So it allows me to develop fast, and also to what's also very important is that it's much easier to work with other people. Once you have all the rules laid out, like we use controllers, we give it a capital. The models, we put it also in capitals. This is our folder structure, and it's much easier to work with multiple people on the same project. Because I've seen some code from other developers. They just here's one big JavaScript file with everything from all the complex actions from the entire website, and I'm done with things like that. You know? I just want clear, separated views, and it's much easier to work with. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. What speed Angular what speed the best for which type of application?
Basically, for any
what
single
size
page
or-
application.
Sorry?
For any single page application, this is the best technique.
Blogs and things like that, or?
Oh no, anything you can make corporate applications as well with Angular. Yeah. You can I think you can do all kinds of things with it.
Yeah.
Because I'm making touchscreen applications as well right now with Angular and with HTML, so I think it's very versatile.
So,
Huh?
So, and compared to jQuery, what's really because apart to saying that I don't need to access objects,
Yeah.
things like that.
Well, actually, it has a small version of jQuery built inside, but you can combine it with jQuery as well. The whole idea is that you don't access the DOM from the controllers, but that doesn't mean that you never access the DOM. This is a concept that I didn't cover right now, which is called directives. And directives allow you to make custom tags, custom HTML tags, which have a very rich functionality. And then you will have to update the document object model. But this is in a separate, I can do a whole separate talk about that. But it actually plugs in very well. So if you have an application, for example, this one, as you can see here, I load the Angular library, and by default it has this jQuery Mini, I think it's called. It has it is built in, but the moment you add your own jQuery, or you add another library like MooTools or Zepto, it's going to use that library. So it's automatic. It's automatically aware that you want to use a separate or different engine, and then it will work with that engine. So you don't. You will still need to access the DOM for some things. It's inevitable, of course.
Is there a dependency between jQuery versions?
No. I don't think so. We'll have to check.
For the input with AngularJS, is there a function to send this input and write it on AngularJS?
There are a lot of people working with it already, so there's a huge code base of all these components that you can use. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not in the core of Angular.
No. So the idea of Angular is to keep it very simple. That's why they also split out the routing and the animation, for example. But you can add any feature that you like. For example, for a rich text editor, you can have a directive and you can just add one tag to a text area, and it will automatically convert it to a rich text editor, and then you can add other other libraries. Yeah. From the moment that you get the data, you can just use regular JavaScript. You're not in this walled garden. It's very open and very versatile. But it's not. I don't think it has this function built in.
But it's meant to treat the data, but it is also producing like charting.
No, again, these are things that you can add yourself. So if you have a charting library, you can add it to your application. And then the advantage is if you use Angular, you can actually create a thing called a directive, and then you can add chart, for example, and then ng model is chart data, for example. The only thing that Angular will do, it will just manage all of the models and the communication between different views. It doesn't do anything else. All the other parts that you need to add, like charts and advanced features, these are just libraries that you plug into your regular page like you would do with just jQuery. This is only the framework.
To structure your application
Yeah.
and to have a better or easy access to your data.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is really a way of working with JavaScript. Yeah.
Some years ago there was Fusebox.
For example. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same technique. It's more a way of working, a way of collaborating, but it has some nice features already built in. Things that you don't want to do over and over and over again. Yeah. That's the idea of Angular. Yeah.
But you are exposing part of all of your business logic within an HTML file.
Yeah. But you can do all of the. This is just the data. We're moving more and more towards a web where more things are done on the client, contrary to what we used to do. But still, all your business logic and calculations, for example, you can all do all of that on the server. This is just the visual side of things. Yeah. That's the approach that you decide to take, whether you want to push things to the server or push things to the client.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we still have the small matter of the raffle. Who here is still a virgin? Nobody wants to speak up now. We need an innocent hand. Yeah, okay. You're innocent enough. Right, so we go first for the Photoshop elements. 3 names, please. Zie nu, Jonathan Pinkett. Who else do we have? Eddie Munzels? If we do this again, please write in capital. Yves Prignon. Phone number and everything. If anyone wants to stalk him, it's 498.
Too long?
Right, then we still have 2 Confusion Builder licenses. For that, I'm going to need to take your name and email, and I'll have Rakshit get in touch with you about the licenses. So, number 1. Wouter van Dalen. Number 2. Murat. That's you? Okay. So I'm still going to need your full name and your email address. So, yeah, that's basically it, unless there are some more questions generally about user group for the meeting of today.
It was really nice.
Okay.
It's the first time I think.
Okay.
But I don't know if you think to do it also via video conference.
We do have that option, but we haven't used it yet.
It would be nice actually because sometimes it's difficult to come and to